Alright, a very good afternoon, students, and today we continue with the chapter The Enemy with the para on page 27 that starts with What shall we do with this man? Alright, so till now you know that a man has been washed ashore, a white man with a bullet wound. Alright, and so we continue from there. What shall we do with this man? Sadao muttered. But his trained hands seemed to be on their own will, to be doing they could do, what they could to stanch the fearful bleeding. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadao said, answering himself. Now the bleeding was stopped for the moment. He stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly that would be best, Hannah said steadily. But she continued to stare down at the motionless man. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sadao said. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said, but neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert figure. What is he? Hannah whispered. There is something about him that looks American, Sadao said. He took up the battered cap. Yes, there, almost gone, was the faint lettering. A sailor, he said, from an American warship. He spelled it out. U.S. Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. He has escaped, Hannah cried softly, and that is why he is wounded. In the back, Sadao agreed. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, Come, are we able to put him back into the sea? If I am able, are you? Sadao asked. No, Hannah said, but if you can do it alone. Sadao hesitated again. The strange thing is, he said, that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy, and he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. But since he is wounded, you also cannot throw him back to the sea, Hannah said. Then there is only one thing to do. You must carry him into the house. But the servants, Sadao inquired. So they inspect the man. He has been injured with a bullet. So Sadao says, what will I do with him? But then his hand, because he is a trained doctor, automatically हातले चाहिँ उले bleeding रोक्नु try गर्दै थियो. Now they are in a dilemma, like I said in the beginning of the chapter. के चाहिँ गर्नुपर्ने हो भनेर. Should we hand him over or should we treat him? As a doctor, he thinks that he should treat him, but as a Japanese citizen, he thinks that he should turn him over to the authorities. What is he? Hannah asked. And when they check, usko cap ma ke dekhcha faint letters ma US Navy भनेर लेखिरहेको हुन्छ. So he's an American, all right. Right now Japan is in war with America. उनीहरूको war भइरहेको छ. So he is an enemy soldier, and he as a Japanese guy should turn him over to the authorities. And he says that as well. Ule ke bhन्छ Sadaule that the right thing to do would be to turn him over. And agar usलाई injury नभएको भए म उलाई Japanese authority लाई सोपी पनि दिन्थे. But he is injured. यस्तो condition मा चाहिँ कसरी गर्नु? Maybe I should turn him back to the sea. Sea बाट निक्लेर आएको थियो, म सीमै फ्याँक्दिन्छु since he is unconscious. उले Hannahलाई सोध्छ, will you do it? And Hannah says, no, I cannot do it. Alright, but if you can do it alone, तिमी एक्लैले नै त्यो सोल्जरलाई फेरि सीमा हान्नु सक्छ भने चाहिँ भन्दा Sadao says, no, I cannot. Then Hannah says, fine, I can't do it, you can't do it. He is injured, so you want to look after him. Abu, we have no other option, but we have to take him back into the house. And Sadao also does not disagree. He just says, but what about the servants? Alright, ठीक है sir, he is injured, I'll treat him. But what about the servants? We must simply tell them that we intend to give him to the police, as indeed we must, Sadao. We must think of the children and your position. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner of war. Thus, certainly, Sadao agreed. I would not think of doing anything else. Thus agreed, together they lifted the man. He was very light, like a fowl that had been half starved for a long time, until it is only feathers and skeletons. So his arms dangling, they carried him up the steps and into the side door of the house. The door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death it had not been used. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man, who would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. Hannah went to the wall cupboard and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk, and the lining was pure white silk. He is so dirty, she murmured in distress. Yes, he had better be washed, Sadao agreed. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. I cannot bear for you to touch him, she said. We shall have to tell the servants he is here. I'll tell Yumi now. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. Sadao considered a moment. Let it be so, he agreed. You tell Yumi and I'll tell the others. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. It was faint, but it was there. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. His heart too was yet alive. He will die unless he is operated on, Sadao said. Considering the question is whether he will not die anyway. Hannah cried out in fear. Don't try to save him. What if he should live? What if he should die? Sadao replied. He stood gazing down the motionless man. The man must have extraordinary vitality, or he would have been dead by now. But then he was very young, perhaps not even 25. You mean die from the operation? Hannah asked. Yes, Sadao said. And so they took the man inside. Right now, as they are going inside, Hannah warns Sadao. She tells him that, remember one thing, we have to hand him over to the authorities. We cannot keep him in our house forever. Remember, you are a Japanese man. You have a family here. You have a reputation to uphold. And it is the only right thing to do. We should hand him over. Think of the children, all right? Think of the family. If they find out that we are harboring a prisoner of war in our house. And Sadao says, of course, that is the thing that I intend to do. Once this man is a bit well, I will hand him over to the authorities. So they took him inside and he was very light, all right? He was half starved. It felt as if he was just skin and bones. They took him inside the house and he placed that injured man in his father's bedroom, which was all in the traditional Japanese style with the bed laid on the floor. He placed him on the bed and Hannah took out a blanket to cover him, but she hesitated a bit because that quilt was covered with flowered silk and the lining was pure white silk. And she says, he's such a dirty man, he might ruin the quilt. And Sadao says, yes, he is dirty. We need to clean him. You get hot water and I'll wash him. But Hannah resisted. She said, no, you will not wash this white man. I will tell one of the servants. I'll tell Yumi. Yumi is a girl who is in charge of taking care of Sadao's children. So Hannah says, I will ask Yumi to clean for him. And Sadao agrees. He says, fine, I'll not wash him. You tell Yumi, and I'll tell the other servants. And then Sadao, he checks his pulse, he checks his heartbeat, he says, this man is alive, but if I don't operate upon him, he will die. And Hannah says, but please don't try to save him. What if he should live? It will be as if we are saving the enemy, and that is not what we should be doing as Japanese citizens. And Sadao says, but what if he dies? And Hannah says, you mean die from the operation? And Sadao says, most possibly. Right? He has a will for living, that is why he's alive. Otherwise, he should be dead by now. By the injury that he has faced, he should be dead. But he looks so young. Right? He was a very young man. Perhaps not even 25. So Hannah considered this doubtfully, and when she did not answer, Sadao turned away. At any rate, something must be done with him, he said. At first, he must be washed. He went quickly out of the room, and Hannah came behind him. She did not wish to be left alone with the white man. He was the first she had seen since she left America, and now he seemed to have nothing to do with those whom she had known there. Here he was her enemy, a menace, living or dead. She turned to the nursery and called Yumi. But the children heard a voice, and she had to go in for a moment and smile at them and play with the baby boy, now nearly 3 months old. Over the baby's soft black hair, she motioned with her mouth, Yumi, come with me. I'll put the baby to bed, Yumi replied. He is ready. She went with Yumi into the bedroom next to the nursery and stood with the boy in her arms while Yumi spread the sleeping quilts on the floor and laid the baby between them. Then Hannah led the way quickly and softly to the kitchen. The two servants were frightened at what their master had just told them. The old gardener, who was also a house servant, pulled the few hairs on his upper lip. The master ought not to heal the wound of this white man, he said bluntly to Hannah. The white man ought to die. First, he was shot. Then the sea caught him and wounded him with her rocks. If the master heals what the gun did and what the sea did, they will take revenge on us. I'll tell him what you have to say, Hannah replied courteously. But she herself was also frightened, although she was not superstitious as the old man was. Could it ever be well to help an enemy? Nevertheless, she told Yumi to fetch the hot water and bring it to the room where the white man was. And so Hannah, she went to get Yumi so that she could wash the injured American soldier, the enemy in this case. She went to the nursery to call Yumi, but she saw that the baby was awake, so she had to play with her baby for quite some time, all right? And his boy was only 3 months old. So she told Yumi, Yumi, come with me. And Yumi told her that the boy is almost asleep, ready to sleep. So let me just put him to bed and I will come to you. And so they put the baby to sleep and Yumi came out. And as they went to the kitchen, Sadao had already told the other servants what has been happening in the house, and they were not happy at all. They were discussing what had transpired and what their master was doing. The old gardener, who was an old servant of theirs, he was having a conversation with Hannah next. He told her, Master must not save this white man. This white man ought to die. All right. He was first injured by the gun. Then he was injured by the sea. So now if the master saves him, he will be going against the gun and the sea. And the gun and the sea will take revenge on them. So Hannah was very polite to the servant. She said, fine, I will let the master know what you think about the situation. And even she was frightened, all right, not because of superstition like the gardener, all right, but she knew that nothing good will come out of this. Nothing good will come out of she and her husband helping to save an enemy soldier. So she told Yumi to get the hot water into the room, into Sadao's father's room where the enemy was being kept. She went ahead and slid back the partitions. Sadao was not there yet. Yumi, following, put down her wooden bucket. Then she went over to the white man. When she saw him, her thick lips folded themselves into stubbornness. "I have never washed a white man," she said, "and I will not wash so dirty a one now." Hannah cried at her severely. "You will do what your master commands you." There was so fierce a look of resistance upon Yumi's round, dull face that Hannah felt unreasonably afraid. After all, if the servant should report something that was not as it happened. "Very well," she said with dignity. "You understand, we only want to bring him to his senses so that we can turn him over as a prisoner." "I will have nothing to do with it," Yumi said. "I am a poor person, and this is not my business." "Then please," said Hannah gently, "return to your own work." At once Yumi left the room, but this left Hannah with the white man alone. She might have been too afraid to stay, had not her anger at Yumi's stubbornness now sustained her. "Stupid Yumi," she muttered fiercely. "Is this anything but a man? And a wounded, helpless man?" In the conviction of her own superiority, she bent impulsively and untied the knotted rugs that kept the white man covered. When she had his breast bare, she dipped the small clean towel that Yumi had brought into the steaming hot water and washed his face carefully. The man's skin, though rough with exposure, was of a fine texture and must have been very blond when he was a child. So when Yumi reached inside, she saw the white man, and she told Hannah straight away that she will have nothing to do with this white man. She said that "I have never washed a white man in my life, and I will not start with this one. All right, he is my enemy. I will not touch him." And Hannah said, "You have to do what your master tells you to do." And yet Yumi resisted. There was such a strong look of resistance on Yumi's face that Hannah became a bit afraid. She thought, what if the servants go ahead and tell the authorities what we are doing here? And so she says, "Fine, you don't want to touch him, don't worry. You don't have to. I will do it. But understand this, we are not saving him, all right? We will just make sure that he is alive, and then we will hand him over as a prisoner." And Yumi says, "It is not my business. You do what you want, all right? I am a poor person. I am here to take care of the children. That is it. I have no interest in this business of yours." So Yumi said respectfully, Hannah said respectfully, "All right, Yumi, you go back to the children. I will deal with it." Now she is a bit angry, all right? She is a bit She is a bit hurt by the way how Yumi talked down upon her, and her ego and her pride kept her inside the room where the prisoner was. She said to herself, "Stupid Yumi, how can she be afraid of this white man who is almost dead? He cannot hurt her in any way." So she started washing the man, and once she rubbed the face with hot water and a fresh piece of cloth, she could see that this man had a fine textured skin and must have been very blond as a child. When she was thinking these thoughts, though not really liking the man better now that he was no longer a child, she kept on washing him until his upper body was quite clean. But she dared not turn him over. Where was Sadao? Now her anger was ebbing, and she was anxious again, and she rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Then, lest the man be chilled, she put the quilt over him. "Sadao," she called softly. He had been about to come in when she called. His hand had been on the door, and now he opened it. She saw that he had brought his surgeon's emergency bag and that he wore his surgeon's coat. "You have decided to operate," she cried. "Yes," he said shortly. He turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel upon the floor of the tokonoma alcove. and put his instruments out upon it. Now, tokonoma is a Japanese word which the meaning of which has been given at the bottom of the page, which means a niche or an alcove in a Japanese home for displaying a flower arrangement, right, or other piece of art. So it is a piece where Japanese art can be displayed. So on that he had laid his instrument, a sort of a tray, all right. Fetch towels, he said. She went obediently, but how anxious now, to the linen shelves and took out the towels. There ought also to be old pieces of matting, so that the blood would not ruin the fine floor covering. She went out to the back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights, and took an armful of them. But when she went back to the room, she saw this was useless. The blood had already soaked through the packaging and the man's wound in the man's wound and had ruined the mat under him. Oh, the mat, she cried. Yes, it is ruined, Sadao replied, as though he did not care. Help me to turn him, he commanded her. She obeyed him without a word, and he began to wash the man's back carefully. Yumi would not wash him, she said. Did you wash him then? Sadao asked, not stopping for a moment his swift, concise movements. Yes, she said. He did not seem to hear her, but she was used to this absorption when he was at work. She wondered for a moment if it mattered to him what was the body upon which he worked so long, as it was for the work he did so excellently. And so, while she's cleaning the man and thinking about all the thoughts that was coming up on her mind, she remembered that the man had a wound which was bleeding on his back, so she could not turn him over, right? So she called for Sadao. She became a bit irritated, she was becoming a bit anxious, and Sadao just came in right at the moment when she was calling after him. And she saw that he had on his surgeon's coat and he had his surgery tools with him. And so she said, so you're going to operate on him? And Sadao says, yes. And he told Hannah to get some mat, all right, so that the blood that pours from the wound will not ruin the mat underneath them. So Hannah went out obediently. She got towels for the surgery, all right. She got some mat, but as she came in with the mat, she saw that it was useless because the man was already bleeding and blood had soaked through the mat. Oh, the mat, cried Hannah, and Sadao replied, yes, the mat is ruined. But he was absorbed in his work, all right. He didn't even care about the mat. And then Hannah told her Sadao what had transpired. She told him about what Yumi had told and how she refused to wash him. And Sadao replied, so did you wash him? And Hannah said, yes. And Sadao was not even concerned, all right. He was fully absorbed in his work. And it was okay with Hannah, for she was used to seeing Sadao lost in his own world while he was working. And so she started thinking, does my husband even care whom he is trying to save? He is our enemy, and yet he is working so dedicatedly, with full dedication, so he's working with full dedication just to save this man. So maybe it is his pride for his work in which he is so excellent. Remember, he's the best surgeon in Japan, right? So with this, we stop the second part of this chapter, the enemy, here, and we'll continue with the third video in the coming days. All right. So please go through the text of all the parts that have been covered in this second video for the chapter, the enemy. Find the difficult words and underline them as well. So until the next video, please stay safe and take care.